just want to start by acknowledging that the kluge-ruhe collection is on the land of the Monash Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And since we're all joining from locations around the world, I just wanted to acknowledge all of the Indigenous nations where each of us are located. And I encourage you that if you don't know whose land you're on, or who the local Indigenous people are in your region, that you would find out and learn more about them and their art and their culture as well. So welcome to the first webinar in a series where we're hearing from artists about their new and recent work, what it's been like for them in quarantine, dealing with the reality of COVID-19, and exploring the new ideas that they're thinking about in their work. I'm really excited to introduce Kent Morris to everyone today. I was really honored last year to get to spend lots of time with Kent, driving him around. I'm glad he survived my driving. And I learned so much from him and was so impressed with everything he's trying to do with his work. And I'll start with just a really brief introduction. And then I'll hand it over to him. So Kent is a Barkindji artist who lives and works in Melbourne. We were just talking about what it's been like with COVID-19 in Australia and Melbourne more specifically. He holds a bachelor's from Monash University and a postgraduate diploma from Victorian College of the Arts. His work has been featured in the 2017 Tarnanthi Festival and also the Telstra National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Art Award for a number of years running now. Hopefully we'll hear a little bit about that. His work is held in numerous important public and private collections, including the National Gallery of Victoria, Koorie Heritage Trust, and the Parliament House Collection. So without further delay, I will hand it over to you, Kent.
Thanks, Lauren.
And
hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining. I'm just going to share my PowerPoint, I think.
Looks like it maybe just got slid down to the bottom there.
Okay. Yeah, okay, here we go. All right, thank you. So hello, thanks for joining, and it's a great honour to be here. I'm dialing in from the lands of the Yalukit clan of the Bunwarang people, where I've lived for over 25 years. It's in Melbourne, Victoria. And Yalukit are people of the river. It's a beautiful bay area with before the changes and interventions, a river running out into that bay. I'm a Barkindji artist. Barker means river, so I'm a river person, but from the Darling River, from outback northwestern New South Wales. And the Darling River runs from Wentworth in the south right up to Burke in the north. And the ancestors on my father's side, both his mother and father, Barkindji people, born in Tilpa and Louth between Wilcannia and Burke. So again, we're in northwestern outback New South Wales. You may know of the Darling River. It's one of the major river systems in this country, and unfortunately under great stress at the moment due to agriculture and misuse of that river system. So I'm fortunate to be living on the country of river people, but away from my ancestral homelands. I have Irish heritage on my mother's side. And look, I'd like to also pay my respects not only to the traditional owners where I am, Yalukit people, but of course Monash Nation, where the kluge-ruhe is situated, and to all First Nations traditional owners across the US and across the country, and wherever you're tuning in from or listening in from. Just pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the continuing and strong, rich cultures that are associated with each of those lands and nations. I was very fortunate last year, and how things can change in a year. Look at this photo. We wouldn't get a photo like this today with the social distancing, but here I am at the conclusion of my extraordinary residency at the kluge-ruhe in April of last year with the wonderful team, Margot, Henry, Fenella, Nicole and Lauren. And it was an extraordinary experience, but I'm just going through these photos. This was a session with giving a tour of my exhibition, of the Unvanished exhibition that was held at kluge-ruhe. And again, it's amazing how things can change in 12 months. It's a great, it's an unfortunate situation, but a real situation we find ourselves in at the kluge-ruhe 12 months later is closed, whereas last year was we were vibrant, bubbling, expressing culture and stories and learnings with large groups of people and sitting quite close to each other and enjoying that interaction. So it's interesting where we are 12 months down the track. I was very fortunate to be there last year. I can't imagine what would have happened if my residency was locked in for April of this year. It would have been very devastating, as it was an extraordinary learning experience. It was very sad to leave after spending a month with such wonderful people, but fortunately, not long afterwards in August, the wonderful Henry Skerritt was able to attend the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Art Awards in Darwin. I was able to catch up with him, and again, looking back on these photos, interesting to see the proximity and how close we are as people and how much that's changed. So it's a lot of changes, a lot of new ways of thinking and being. And we'll get to that. I'll get to that next. But it's just interesting to look back on such a short period of time and that closeness and that idea of proximity to each other that we had, and the difference that we have right about now. So Darwin last year, still managed to catch up with kluge-ruhe mob and have some great time out of Darwin. So now this is my reality. No people, just a room that I seem to be in 24/7. So for 8 weeks, with my work at the Torch, the not-for-profit organisation I work with, and with my art practice, this is my studio, and this is where I've been spending a great deal of my time, apart from the allowed walks that we have, essential walks for exercise or to go and get some shopping once a week. So I've been living in this room for 8 weeks, and it has been, a very isolating experience. As you can see from the photos of April, I love people. So to not have that connection with people in that physical way has been really quite challenging. Interestingly, and this is something that's very fortunate, as I said, I live on the beautiful country of Yalukit Weelam people, right on the bay. It's named Nam in English and Western language, Port Phillip Bay. And so the walks along the bay every night to catch the beautiful sunsets over there have become an essential part of my partner's process. And First Nations philosophies and belief systems, you're never alone. When you're on country, you're never alone, because everything is interconnected. So you're connected to sky, land, water, plants and animals. So essentially in this period, around an Indigenous philosophy of being, there is no such thing as isolation, because you're never alone. And one of the interesting things that's been happening here, as has been happening around the world, is we're seeing that real cleaning up of the waterways, the cleaning up of the air, less traffic, less people, less activity that contributes to the damaging of the environment and to country, which we are so blessed to be connected to, but also responsible in many ways for protecting and maintaining. So to see the clarity of air and water has been quite an extraordinary thing over the period, and hopefully something that the world can take learnings from. So it's not only happening here, it's happening around the world. So one of the results of this is there's been a whole bunch of wildlife coming back into areas where they would have inhabited, but don't inhabit due to the number of cars and people in the area. But with that reduction of cars and people, one of the great friends that I've made over the isolation period has been this beautiful nankeen night heron. It's a nocturnal hunting native Australian bird, and very secretive, very reclusive, but here he is. And every night we'd follow him on his path, hunting up and down the canal, and he's right out on a major walkway on the fence there. But as you can see, there's no one around and there's no traffic. There's one parked car there, and this is around 9:30. His time. He's a nocturnal bird. So just seeing the interaction of native birds come back into the environment has been a real plus. Black swans coming into the canal, white-faced herons. We had a whole bunch of flame robins coming, which I've never seen. So a whole lot of wildlife coming back to what would have been the natural habitat and to enrich the environment. So one of the joyful things in this quite devastating and tragic period of change has been that ability to connect with nature in a more not definite way, but in a more varied way. And to see the birds coming in back to, great egrets, coming back in to inhabit these environments. So during this period, I've made a work regarding this Nankeen night heron and this idea of interconnection and how everything in the First Nations philosophy is interconnected. Things aren't separate. So even viruses are part of the natural world. It's just the system and structures around separation and respect for place and everything in its place, has been lost over time. And so where we're having contact with things, we, as human beings, we probably shouldn't have. We're incursions into natural areas, incursions into areas where there are native animals, and crossing over environments and producing human contact with areas of the natural world that we really should be avoiding. So again, this idea of interconnectivity is something that I've been exploring during this period. And this is a work created from my interactions with the Nankeen night heron, and just around how you should never be alone if you're on country and you're on the land that you live and you are connected to, again, sea, land, sky, plants, animals, people, everything interconnected together, not separated. And that separation of systems and breaking down of ecosystems and the respect, I guess, for everything in its place and how everything needs to be in its place and interconnected to form the healthy environments that we so desperately crave but have generally lost. So this is a work I made around the Nankeen night heron, that experience of never being alone, even when you really are isolated, and trying to look at a broader view around our place and how we relate to our place. And are we separate from that place? Do we only involve ourselves with our immediate life and the needs and demands of that? Or do we think more broadly about how we are connected to all things? And how do we maintain that balance and that interconnection? We're back in time now, and it's a bit of a time travelling journey today. So we're heading back to April, kluge-ruhe, and the Unvanished series that was shown there. I just want to show what's happened since the residency. And I was very fortunate to not only spend time with the extraordinary people at the kluge-ruhe, but the extraordinary collection there. Also to head into Washington, DC, and to see and experience a whole range of art, First Nations art, African American art across the board, and to really interact with people and art in a major way. I then spent the next month between New York and LA again, exploring and opening my mind to art on an international stage, and what it might mean for my work and the work of First Nations people from other countries coming into a different country. It's quite an eye-opening experience to see the reaction to my work, which is really based on First Nations issues from Australia. But again, what I didn't probably understand at the time was the global connection of those issues around the world, and the reception this work would get in another country was quite extraordinary. So since the residency, I'll just show you what I've been up to. I came back pretty much thrown straight into some wonderful public works, and as my art practice develops, my desire is to have the works outside of galleries and more into places where people can interact and engage with them. So this was a commission. The entire Unvanished series was put into a learning centre at the head office of Australian Unity, right in the centre of Melbourne. And this room is used for educational purposes, for skills building. It covers such a wide range of demographic of people coming in to utilise the space to learn. And so the entire series is down one wall of that learning space, and people then get to interact with, again, First Nations ideas, thoughts and philosophies within this space that people are coming to learn, and people are coming through that space every hour of every day. So that was a fantastic, I guess, start to my return to Melbourne from the US.
Can I just have a quick question about that? It seems like this Unvanished series has been exhibited in so many different venues in a really wonderful way. And I guess I'm just wondering, in case we have some participants who didn't get to see that exhibition at kluge-ruhe but might be joining us now, can you just say a little bit about that series and about the title Unvanished?
Yes, absolutely. And look, just for everybody tuning in, across my whole practice, there's fantastic documentation of all the series and where they've been shown on my website, kentmorris.com.au, that you can check out. But this series really looks at reconstructing the built environment and looking at the history of place. So these are basically rooftops of buildings across where I live, on the country that I live, my ancestral country that I visit for travel and trade and to see my family. And it's really about the sovereign presence of that place and the history of that place, which often goes unspoken and unseen. And so trying to readdress the imbalance around the visual history of place and the unseen histories of First Nations Australians within place. So the inspiration for the title Unvanished came from a book written about my people. It's called Lament for the Barkindji, the vanishing race of the vanished race of the Darling River, something around this. But it's the idea that somehow, you know, my people had vanished. And of course, you know, a completely incorrect assertion, given how many Barkindji people inhabit not only our homelands, but around the country. And that I went to a family reunion, which will lead into the next series as well, where the descendants of 4 strong Barkindji women gathered on country, and there were about, in attendance, around 700 plus just descendants of those 4 women, harking back to the fact that only 12 of their ancestors had walked onto a pastoral station just to survive. But the Barkindji people, my clan, Gunu Barkindji people, had been reduced to just 12 people with the colonial, you know, interventions and processes that were put in place to remove people and to, unfortunately, you know, dispossess and kill people. There are only 12 left now. Of that 12, there are now thousands of Barkindji people, the descendants of those 12 ancestors. So it's a nice way to reassert presence, that we are here, that we aren't absent, and we aren't unseen, and we definitely have not vanished. And that's where the title comes from. And these are, you know, referencing obviously shield designs and shapes. You've got the native birds and all the stories that they entail. It's a statement of presence and of strength, and that we have survived, and of resilience. Yeah. So that's a sum up of the series.
That's great. Thank
you. I was able also to take the Unvanished series into regional areas and into public galleries to really broadly share this story. And so this is an installation at the Horsham Art Gallery, and these are the larger versions. These are the 1.5 metre by 1 metre versions, and the whole series installed in a walkthrough, which was quite powerful. And so it's been nice to share the story even more broadly through Australia. And then this has led to, again, just trying to get the works out into the public spaces and into areas where people can engage and learn and share their experiences ongoing. So this is the University of Technology in Sydney, New South Wales. It's an installation of new work from the Barkindji Blue Sky series, which I'll show you in a sec. Again, this is a lift shaft that goes up 2 floors and a long corridor within a learning facility. So the University of Technology has a large cohort of international and national students from Australia, and the idea being in this new facility to engage with Indigenous thoughts, knowledges and concepts to help people understand different ways of learning and different ways of understanding the world, and that this country has a long, very long, 60,000 plus at the conservative end of a build-up of knowledge and histories which we need to understand and engage with further. So this is a work from my Barkindji Blue Sky series. It's directly related to the family reunion I was discussing, where we gathered on country, Burke, outback New South Wales, and it looks at not only ancestral stories, so very old stories relating to cosmology and our family histories, but also to the use of new technologies and science, and how very often Indigenous knowledges and thoughts and ideas are only validated when Western science can come and say, oh, well, look at that, they were right. This is the case. There was a lava flow here, or a meteor did hit here, or this is the way that the waterways have worked, or long historical narratives that Western science feels it has to prove to validate Indigenous knowledge, which has been around for a lot longer. So this series centres around a flock of Karelas, and this was shown at the wonderful Vivian Anderson Gallery that represent me in Melbourne, Victoria. And this was the installation of the exhibition. I was very much inspired from my trip and all the extraordinary works I saw, and I'll just let people know straight out I'm a major solar wit fan, and I was able to see some extraordinary solar wit works on my trip and that beautiful retrospective out at Masmoka. And so I guess part of the inspiration and from my kluge-ruhe residency and visit to the US was just around presenting works and how to engage an audience without overbaking the cake, and to present ideas in a way that's really thought-provoking and strong and visually, punchy, I guess.
Hey, Ken, really quickly, before you go into more depth about the Barkindji Blue Sky work, we had a question about the University of Technology installation and a little bit about the technical application of that work to the wall. We had a question of whether it was wallpaper, made into wallpaper, or what exactly the process was to install that.
Yes, look, very good question, because it is a permanent installation. So it was a lot of work, the production side, to make sure that we could maintain the integrity of the work. But of course, it's a very busy, it doesn't look busy here. Of course, we photographed it when it was empty, but there's students coming in, well, not as much now, but of course, when things resume and prior to COVID, students every day, every hour of the day, coming through into the corridors, into the learning rooms, of course, up and down the lifts and into these wonderful external learning and shared working spaces. So it's a really tough, hardy, laminated vinyl, which has been adhered to, in this instance, on the lift shaft, concrete, directly to the concrete, and in here, on this instance, in the corridors, to the, can't remember what the material was, a kind of MDF, I think. We worked really, I spent days out with the production company, and of course, on the windows, you've got those semi-transparent decals, so it's an incredibly hardy and permanent laminated vinyl that's been adhered to those walls for the long term. And there's been protective strips put in place on the lift shaft to make sure that any traffic or damage, people, bringing trolleys into that lift and this and that. So we had to define ways within the artworks and the aluminium stripping. This is a photo pre the aluminium stripping going onto the corners of the lift shaft, just to make sure that, yes, it's there for a long time. Does that answer that question? Yeah,
I think that's great. Someday I want to do a program about installing public art. That's a whole other interesting rabbit hole to go down. But continue about Barkindji Blue Sky, because I think I'm excited.
There's much more to it than meets the eye. And it's around that sense of permanence and to have those stories shared ongoing, and the amount of traffic that can come through an area, particularly at a learning institution like a university. So again, I'll just share some works from the series and just explain around these Karelas. These are little Karelas, the birds, and they gather in large numbers, and part of the reason for that, and particularly in outback areas, but also in city areas, is that, of course, the destruction of natural habitat and changes to the ecosystem means that for most of our native birds, especially those that can adapt to changes in urban and regional environments, they have to find new ways to interact, new places to live and to feed and to be part of the environment. So for these little Karelas, they've been around. Australia has the oldest native birds on the planet, and so 30 plus million years for our native parrots, songbirds, and our native pigeons. And so they've been here a long time, and they're highly organised, they're highly intelligent, and they're incredibly vocal. And they're very adaptable and resilient, most of them. Some, of course, we've lost, which is a great tragedy. But for those that have been able to maintain that change and resilience, the little Karelas come into Burke, and they are one of our ancestral birds, and they come in large numbers. They relate to the story of the two sisters. And this Barkindji story relates to the Magellan galaxies, the two dwarf galaxies that orbit orbit the Milky Way. One large, one small, so one very old and one not as old. And so this is around the two sisters, one young sister, one older sister. And so our relationship to the cosmos, and again, all things interconnected, is really visualised in these beautiful birds who are now in greater number in different areas. And what they were doing on this day of the family reunion was interacting with what is a large telecommunications tower in the outback, which services the technology for my people and others in the area. And it was a central way that we are able to maintain, transmit, regenerate our culture, our family histories amongst all the separations, forced separations, and other forms of dispossession. With these family reunions, it's a way for our family to come back together, and some who have been separated for a long time and making contact for the first time. So on this day, with this beautiful sky over my country, I was at breakfast with about 50 of my family, and I heard these birds come in, and I ran out with the camera and took a series of photos which were just terrible. I couldn't use them at all. It's an extraordinarily large tower, and there was birds flying everywhere, and they're quite small in relation to the tower. But I knew that they probably had a system and a process. So I went back at exactly the same time the next day with a plan after reviewing the photographs. And they stayed, I knew I had about five and a half minutes, was when they came and interacted quite vigorously with the tower and then moved on. So I set myself up, and within the 5 minutes captured the series, the Barkindji Blue Sky, which for me looked at the connection of this wonderful ancestral story relating to astrology and cosmology, how here we are on this country, in this place, but our connection runs back to deep time, and it's still connecting today. But it's, again, change, resilience. For First Nations people around the world, the resilience means that we are still here, and we can change. We've had to adapt. We have long histories of doing that. And to me, this situation of the technology, the new technology and the ancient stories provided a great cross-combination of how we maintain our culture and how we celebrate our culture and how we utilise new technologies, not only to maintain, but again, to regenerate, through language apps, through the transmission of family histories and cultural stories. Technology is very important, but it's the utilisation of technology and ancient history, philosophies and stories, which I believe is what we need, the way forward to maintain any kind of sense of sustaining our existence on this planet, given that we are so far out of balance with the natural world, that somehow through this combination of science and Indigenous philosophies and knowledges, we could, I guess, reassess and redirect our priorities around what's important. And so in Australia, where you've got 60,000 to 100,000 years plus of Indigenous knowledge and occupation of this country, within 250 years of colonisation, the country is in great stress. The environment's in great stress. We have a lot of disconnection. We have major waterways and forests, and extinction of native animals and those on the brink. And of course, First Nations communities still in a great and very tragic in a situation of disadvantage. But it needn't be the case. All we need to do is combine these two ideas to have more respect and understanding of First Nations knowledges and experiences. And I think we could readdress all of the issues we're facing. Everyone's fighting over water. The environment is getting destroyed through greed, overuse, mismanagement. But of course, the bushfires we've seen, and again, with COVID-19 and the spread of that, but particularly in this country with the bushfires, well, with Indigenous land management knowledges and philosophies and practices, we wouldn't have that exposure to such risk. And again, mismanagement of waterways, we would again have more of a balance, which would alleviate or minimise some of these tragic circumstances which are devastating communities and the natural environment. So there's a lot wound in. I'm happy to say that the whole series is currently on show at the Museum and Art Gallery of the Museum, Murray Art Museum, Albury, as part of the biannual National Photography Prize. Now, it's a huge $30,000 prize, 12 shortlisted artists from around the country. And I'm happy to say the Barkindji Blue Sky series is currently being shortlisted, and I think an announcement on the winner will be made in the next couple of weeks. So keep your fingers crossed, all you mob out there, put all your energies into a good outcome. Well, it's a good outcome for whoever wins it, but it's quite nice to see the works installed in this way. Working with the curators, we talked about that view that I'm always having, looking up to the sky. And sky is part of country. It's again, no separation, land, sky and sea. when you're looking through a First Nations lens. And so the idea we had was to install the works in a vertical format that might give people a little bit of an idea of what it was like for me on my country, looking up at this enormous technological structure and seeing the birds interacting with it and what that meant to me around, again, a deep time period of knowledge and understanding of this country, and then again how Indigenous communities utilising technology in unique ways to maintain and transmit culture. Now, the wonderful Lorraine Connolly-Northey, who's an extraordinary artist, is just there. She lives up on that country, just showing me how the installation was. So you can see the scale there with only Lorraine. But again, good to get the work broadly expressed. Now, on to more public things. Again, it's culture in motion. So I've got my own tram at the moment. This has all happened. Look, I was applying for this project while I was at kluge-ruhe. You know, I was applying for public programs. This is a series of art trams that are done for the Melbourne International Art Festival. And I was fortunate to get one of the trams. And so again, it's art out and about. It's sharing our stories broadly, people interacting with it in a public way. For me, it's culture in motion. It's not located in one space in a gallery or a museum. It's out and about every day on the tracks, traversing the city and the suburbs. And this is a work from a new series that relates to, again, looking at the domestic environment, looking at buildings and the histories of those buildings and the land and the country that's on, and the sovereign nature of Indigenous presence. So this is actually, if you look closely, you know, it's Venetian blinds and doorknobs. There's a balcony with some flowers, and the magpies who are part of our creation stories from time immemorial. And they are very significant, and how for me and for many other First Nations people and communities, the presence of ancestors reshapes that place and adds that which is seemingly missing to most, but which is always there. The history of that place, stories of that place, the ongoing connection to that country, and how I believe through my work I'm trying to express that First Nations presence, sovereignty, ideas and philosophies can reshape the way we view the world. It's looking at the world through a First Nations lens and the benefits that can come with that.
So Ken, I just have a question about the increase of public works, of public artwork that you've been pursuing. You just talked about it a little bit there, but I just wanted to ask you to expand on why you feel like that's important, because a lot of artists would be really happy to just have their things in museums and art galleries all of the time. And so I would love to hear a little bit more about why you feel like that's really important.
Yeah, well, I think one of the central tenets, particularly for, you know, First Nations art and Indigenous art and culture in Australia, is that it's not broadly or widely enough known and recognised. We have, of course, a huge array of extraordinary First Nations artists in this country, and yes, a lot of the artworks and exhibitions are in gallery spaces, and this is a fantastic way to share and express our culture. But I feel there's a whole audience that's missing out. And I think given the state this country's in, not only environmentally, but politically, the inability to listen to First Nations ideas and to understand that First Nations people and communities are the best placed to alleviate some of the disadvantages that we're facing, and to build not only that, but sustainability for this country, which is just heading down a road of complete non-sustainability. We're already there, and we're seeing the damaging effects of that. So there's a real sense that the generosity and the openness of First Nations communities and thinkers and writers and artists and those involved in social change and politics, we are really generous with our ideas and thoughts. It's just that there's two sides involved, one side talking and the other side not really listening. So it's very hard for us to, I guess, break down the barriers that this country has around incorporating our beliefs and our thoughts and our, I guess, ideas, particularly around caring for country and sustainability of the environment, because, you know, we're not thinking short term. You know, for people who tied to this country for well over 60,000 plus years, always thinking about sustainability in the future. And it seems to be always at odds with the current way of thinking here, which just seems always just to be about the immediate present and, you know, how to capitalise and country as an economy. So I feel that these stories and expressions and ideas need to be broadly shared and outside of the gallery. So I'm trying to have it both ways in a sense. You know, of course, we need to express art and culture through galleries and museums, and that whole sector is so important. But I also believe it's really critical that we more and more get out into the public space with these ideas, so people are becoming more familiar with it on a daily basis. That Indigenous ways of thinking and believing and seeing the world, this idea of what I talk about the First Nations lens, becomes part of everyday life, where it's a struggle to, you know, it's just it shouldn't be a fight, shouldn't be a battle. There should be a greater respect for First Nations ways of thinking and believing, because it's tied so directly to place and to country and to history. And so I'm just trying to move it out and about. And I like the tram, it's in motion. I like culture in motion. I like sharing stories that are moving. I like people interacting on a daily basis and discussing and having conversations who might never go to a gallery or a museum. And maybe then you might inspire them to do that as well.
It makes a lot of sense with your work, because as you say, you're trying to sort of raise awareness about a different way of seeing and noticing what's around us in our environment and what isn't around us, what's missing. And it makes sense that you would want to make that as well seen or as widely seen as possible, rather than containing it in a specific kind of space. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. And to understand that the history of that place, we still have a great struggle here in this country, as many countries do, of accepting the true history of place. But that's the history, and that's our shared history. And whilst it's not, a lot of it's very hard and it's unpalatable, it's real and it's true. And we have lived it and experienced it. It's just trying for the country to find a way to come together, because, you know, Australia's been talking about ideas of reconciliation and recognition and this for decades. But without a true understanding of our history and our shared history and what that means, we will just never get there. So I just think we need the stories and ideas and expressions out and about and constantly there. And I think, you know, particularly through the arts, you know, we're doing that in a major way, but we need to find always new avenues to be expressing those stories. So this happened as well, and I'll tell you what, since I went to the kluge-ruhe, a lot happened. So this was a billboard project through the city of Rudy Vallee, and again it was upsizing my cultural reflections up above series and putting them out in public places. This is, you know, on the main road in Nidri, the 7-Eleven, the petrol station and the 7-Eleven store, the convenience store. So again, the work's large scale, out in public, explanations and people interacting with them as they're doing their daily life, as they're going shopping down the street. And these were up, I think, 6 months or so. And it's a fantastic way, again, to share stories outside of the gallery environment with the broader public. So I wonder if we might pause around my practice, because otherwise I'm going to move on to something a little bit different, but intertwined. But I wonder if we might have a pause here.
Any questions? Yeah, does anybody have any questions so far about Ken's practice? We have no waiting questions right now. Someone asked a question earlier, but I wasn't quite sure about the context for it. So maybe they want to re-ask. Nothing coming through yet. Ken, maybe we continue and talk about the torch, and then maybe people will have some time to reflect on their questions.
So a lot of the things all right, thank you. Thanks, Mona. One of the things I've talked about is around First Nations ideas and philosophies and processes, particularly for addressing the ongoing disadvantage that Indigenous Australians face in areas of education, employment, health, and particularly the area that's close to my heart is Indigenous incarceration. So in Australia, for 2.8% of the general population, Indigenous Australians make up 30% of the prison population. And these won't be new statistics around the world for Indigenous communities, and particularly for communities that may be experiencing that, for want of a better term, you know, situations of within the lower economic, you know, socio-economic strata. You see it around the world. And here in Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are incarcerated at a rate higher than any other race on the planet. And it's a really it's a stinging issue. It's a disgraceful issue. This country is built on incarceration. You know, with the convicts that came here to colonise the nation, but through that process, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were incarcerated in great numbers and for, you know, unconscionable reasons and in great number. And it was really about dispossessing people from their homelands and from their country. Well, it's still going. It's still an ongoing process. And so 9 years ago, I was given the responsibility to build a program that would support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men and women who are incarcerated in Victoria and upon their release from Victoria. And it's the organisation I run is called The Torch. And we work in the 15 prisons of Victoria, providing art, cultural arts, vocational support to First Nations men and women from Australia, and upon their release to connect them to culture and to stories and to parts of their identity that they haven't got access to through the dispossessions and disconnections that have happened through past and present government policies. So it's based on learning about culture and putting together those pieces of identity. It's about creating beautiful artworks, bringing in resources for people to understand the uniqueness of their language group, because often this information just hasn't been transmitted and they haven't had access to it. So they might know the name of their language group. It would be like saying, for example, that you're a Monacan person, but you didn't know any of the history or the culture, the art, designs or stories of your people. And this is often part of the reason that men and women get caught up in the criminal justice system. There's also obviously in this country, you know, over-policing of Aboriginal people, very discriminatory laws and sentencing processes that combine together. And upon release from prison, very limited opportunity to break that cycle of reoffending. So recidivism rates are high. So through the Torch program that I've been able to build and now have a team of 14 people, we're a small not-for-profit, we are really providing access for men and women to find ways to change their lives through redefining who they are, and particularly through the process of creating art. Now it's 9 years down the track and there have been 11 annual exhibitions from incarcerated and recently incarcerated Aboriginal men and women. This year, of course, with COVID striking in, we lost our big, beautiful gallery exhibition. And so the Torch worked very hard to create a virtual platform for the men and women. And 287 artists this year. When I first started the program, about 49 artists showed 60 artworks. This year we have 287 artists exhibiting 300 artworks.
And this virtual exhibition is available, right? The link is in your PowerPoint and people can purchase them. Can they purchase them from the States?
Right, so it started last Thursday. So yes, it's up and available. I'll give you the website address as we go. It's simply thetorch.org.au. And I guess part of the concern we had was taking the whole exhibition into the virtual world, but I'm happy to say in the first week, and a great credit to the Torch and all of the artists, the 159 of those 300 artworks have been sold already in the first week. And we've sold enough. I know, it's amazing, 40 or 45 or 50 from our website that aren't in the exhibition. So I think this is part of winding back into my art practice. This program was developed not only by myself, but by the men and women in the program. I didn't develop the program and then take it out to the prisons. I went out to the prisons first and spoke to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men and women about how would they see the program running? What did they want from it? The Torch thought it would be an art program. That's all good art. We know that theory about art heals everything. But it really was, the men and women didn't really know about art. They really wanted to know about their identity and their culture and their stories. And what do we paint if we don't know who we are and our stories? What should we be doing? They really didn't know how to have the building blocks to be able to create the concept and ideas for their artwork. So they wanted cultural information, cultural knowledge. This was the main thing. The second most important thing was they wanted to know about how to connect to the Indigenous arts industry. How do we exhibit work? What are they even worth? Can we sell them? Is there commissions, licensing, intellectual copyright? These are the two main concerns. And the third most concern was, well, making art. A composition and shapes and colours and the basics of art. So I built it upon what the men and women really wanted and required for their development. And also it was built on the support that I'd been given through elders of the community, long ongoing processes for men and women like myself whose parents had either been removed or disconnected, dispossessed, separated from their country and community. How do we try and rebuild and regain that sense of, or not only gain for the first time, a sense of who you are and the potential you have and pride in who you are, as opposed to intergenerational ongoing sense of, well, you know, and this country's been very aggressive at doing this, that somehow Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are second-class citizens. How do we reverse that so that we regain that sense of our sovereignty and our pride and our possession of our land and culture? So these artworks and this exhibition, it's been quite amazing working with a company in Berlin to create these, and again, inspired by my residency and trip afterward, these beautiful kind of New York warehouse-style galleries that I saw and was so impressed by, to install the works. And you can obviously navigate around these beautiful virtual exhibitions. These are just screenshots of the 3 different exhibitions. One of the challenges for the company in Berlin was that instead of wanting to install 40 or 50 artworks in their galleries, I wanted to install 300. So I think initially they thought I was a little bit crazy, but we worked very closely with them, and the team at the Torch worked overtime, round the clock, to help them help us, we wanted to help them help us to customise their spaces to incorporate these works and to be able to express the themes that are so important through the exhibition. Animals and kinship, birds, bushfires and country was important this year. There was a section where artists really painted around the destruction and devastation, and some around the new growth on their country from the bushfire experience, waterways and belonging. So these are the key central themes. And so this exhibition, all the money generated from sales from the artworks goes directly to the artists, 100% of it, whether they're in prison or in the community. And this is providing that economic stability and empowerment to be able to make decisions and make changes in their lives. And we're seeing a return to prison rate of around 11% for men and women connected to our program, as opposed to the national recidivism rate for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, which is, you know, above 60%. Mm-hmm. So it's been an extraordinary journey. And of course, my, I guess, ideas and philosophies through my practice are interconnected with the work I do at the Torch, because it's around cultural empowerment. It's about regaining a sense of pride. It's about the importance of Indigenous knowledges and philosophies, and how can we integrate that more thoroughly into our everyday lives.
Yeah, really big themes of social justice, really, and environmentalism, and yeah. We have 2 questions from one of our kluge-ruhe docents, so they're both really great questions. The first is, have you ever considered taking photos in other places, such as Port Arthur in Tasmania? It is haunting. So I guess the question is, have you ever thought about taking photos in haunted places?
No, it's a good question. It's a very good question. And part of the central tenet of my practice is that I would not, you know, particularly because a lot of the work, well, all of the work include native birds, that it's not about going to places. It's about the country and the places where I live, my ancestral country, places that I'm connected to, in terms of, again, travel and trade, family, those connections. So I wouldn't be creating works, traveling to someone else's country for that reason, or for, you know, when I'm talking about, some people say to me, this is an interesting one, no one's ever said to me, oh, what about going to this place? But that story's to be told by the people of that country, and that's their story on their country. So in terms of the birds, people often say, gee, you should go here. There's these amazing birds up around there, but it's not around cultural tourism for me. It's around that connection to place and trying to, I guess, express and share how important place is, but understanding more the history of that place and how much are we connected to that place, or how much do we understand that history, and through that shared understanding, how we can build a better rapport and a better future for, you know, for kids and grandkids and ongoing. We don't, I mean, Indigenous nations don't think in terms of 10 and 20 years down the track, you know, think, oh, reduce emissions by 2030, you know, we're thinking in tens of thousands of years. So to get back to that question, look, that story is for, you know, Palawa people from Tasmania. To tell that story, I wouldn't feel comfortable going and working on someone else's country around a story of that nature.
And just for the audiences, in case you're interested, one of the other past resident artists that we're gonna do a program like this with in a couple weeks is Julie Goff, and she's a Tasmanian artist who does a lot of work with haunting places. So if you're curious about that, tune in a couple weeks for Julie Goff's version of this program. But the other question, Ken, was what effect do you think the isolation during COVID-19 will have on your art in your community? So already we've seen how maybe you're getting more opportunities to photograph birds in urban environments.
Well, look, interestingly, fortunately, I'll answer around my family, who mostly live on our ancestral country in outback New South Wales. You know, outback regions have generally been very insulated from COVID-19, whilst the restrictions and measures of isolation have still been in place. They've been really not heavily exposed to it in any shape or form. So thankfully, my family are all well, and this includes great aunts in their 80s and 90s living out in Brewarrina. So I guess the expanse of this country and where my family live means that COVID really hasn't come into those communities. So thank you for asking. I appreciate that question. And my family are all safe, and the communities that I'm directly associated with are safe as well. There was a great concern about remote communities, and particularly the populations that are so important to us of our elders, Aboriginal elders, and then not only for the knowledge that they contain, but how they transmit that knowledge to ongoing generations. And so it's been widely acknowledged in this country. Interestingly, here we go. I mean, finally we had some recognition, I'm not saying begrudgingly, but it had to be expressed about how Indigenous communities had led the way in really protecting their communities against COVID. And the Prime Minister came out on one press conference with a glowing thank you for Indigenous communities. But Indigenous communities do this off their own bat, and they lead the process and have that agency and authority. So maybe that's hopefully a sign of things to come. There's a recognition that we can do things in a very meaningful and positive and very productive way. We have the most at stake around our community, so of course we're the ones that should lead and have that agency. In terms of my work, well, gee, I'm not sure. I found myself, whilst creating work in the times that I could go out and have walks, and again, just walking on country. My whole process is around walking. People think I spend a lot of time in front of a computer, which I absolutely don't. I'm out walking on country and interacting with that country, thinking, listening. Of course, a lot of our listening is related to our learnings, and it's not only around those elements of country. I live in a very urban and developed area, but you've still obviously got some of the central tenets that we believe in throughout all country, whether it's remote, regional, urban or metro. So I've still been able to get out and about, walk and develop new works, but I also found myself, particularly with the Nankeen night heron and this beautiful young white-faced heron, just doing some challenging myself. It's very hard to take photos of these beautiful critters at night in the dark. So I've kind of just worked on a bit of basic photography skills as well around capturing images of these wonderful native birds that again are coming back in and seeing the changes in the environment. COVID's brought in a whole bunch of things. We're thinking differently. For a lot of us, we're working differently. We're being innovative and creative, but we're also seeing changes in the environment and in the ecosystems. Whilst we're still seeing, unfortunately, in this country, the ongoing destruction of native lands as well, areas being logged that are just having bushfires go through them, that are just still trying to recover. But on the flip side, you do see, as I said, cleaner air, cleaner water, repopulating of native animals in areas where they have not generally been associated with. And again, for First Nations philosophies and ideas, the health of people and the communities depends on the health of country, the health of plants and animals, waterways, the skies, land. So it's been an interesting time, and it's been a fertile time for ideas, and fortunately I have been creating work through the period.
I think that's a really good place for us to stop. We don't have any further questions from the audience at this time, and I think it's a good and timely thing to end on the topic of health of country and health of people. So I welcome everyone to give Kent a nice virtual round of applause for sharing his life and his work with us